I would note that, in accordance with changes in the global security environment and President Biden's heightened focus on the Indo-Pacific region, Cyber Command has shifted a task force to focus on competition with China and has created the China Outcomes Group under senior-level leadership. The work of these organizations will be of keen interest to the committee.
Amid continual challenges to the rule-based international order, maintaining a range of credible options underpins our nation's strategic advantage. We have witnessed Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine, China's coercive and malign activity in the Indo-Pacific, and efforts by other state and non-state actors, including violent extremist organizations, to sow instability. In this dynamic environment, U.S. SOCOM's enduring value resides in our ability to combat asymmetric threats, particularly in the gray zone and below the threshold of armed conflict.
Could you elaborate a little bit on SOCOM's role in building out Ukrainian special forces over the last several years? And then what lessons are we applying with regard to what we've learned there to Taiwan special forces? You know, one of the things that you mentioned in the What We Do section of your vision for SOCOM is helping shape the environment to reduce risk, prevent crises, and set conditions for success in competition and conflict. And I'd like to get a little sense, to the extent you can talk about it here, on what we're doing to help Taiwan the way we've helped Ukraine, particularly in the SF world.
Senator, when we first started training with the Ukrainian Special Operations over 8 years ago, they were a smaller force, and they did not necessarily have a SOCOM-like headquarters. That force grew to 3 brigade equivalents commanded by colonels and a training regiment. And they also, over the last 18 months, added a resistance company made up of what we would like a home guard that was embedded in each one of those. And that was through the persistent effort of not just the U.S., but we also brought in allies from other NATO countries.
And you're seeing, obviously, some of the success of that training and structure in the current conflict.
Yes, Senator, we are.
What about Taiwan, to the extent you can talk about that?
Senator, I would prefer to talk about Taiwan in a closed setting, but broadly, building both resistance and resilience in the force. Resistance being the ability to give the punch, but resilience being the ability to take the punch and make sure you can get back up through medical training, through logistics, and through communications is critical. And I think we got to work on both of those with other nations writ large.
Mr. Chairman, thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you for your service. I want to come back to this question of Taiwan that Senator Sullivan was just asking about it. Let me frame it this way. Secretary Maier, let me start with you. I think the Ukrainians are showing how effective and important irregular warfare can be for defeating an enemy invasion. Obviously, that's got a lot of potential relevance to the situation that we see in Taiwan. You know, our goal in Taiwan, I think, hopefully we all agree, should be to prevent an invasion. We don't want to be behind the 8 ball where we're trying to displace one. But we've got a plan for all scenarios, and so irregular warfare has an important role to play. You testified last year, I'm going to quote you here, that the United States should strongly, that's your word, consider options to strengthen Taiwan's irregular warfare capabilities, including their ability to fight in depth, that's you again, using resistance networks or other capabilities after a Chinese amphibious landing. Is that still your view?
It is, Senator, and I think we're doing more work in that regard as others have testified.
Perfect. Can I just ask you to expand on that? Because can you give us an update on what you're doing to help strengthen, what the Pentagon's doing to help strengthen Taiwan's irregular warfare capabilities?
So, Senator, I think General Clarke already hit on some of that. Obviously, we can only go so much in this session, but I think consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act, we are doing all we can to look at a whole of resistance approach. So in some cases, that means doing more exercises, more ability to touch aspects of the Taiwanese infrastructure and determine it's both, as General Clarke said, ability to take a punch and give a punch. That's sort of the most basic level of our assessment at this point.
Very good. General, you testified also last year that, and you just reiterated it to Senator Sullivan, but you testified that you thought the United States should help Taiwan strengthen its irregular warfare capabilities. I'm assuming based on your answer just a second ago, you think that that's still a priority. Is that fair to say?
All in accordance with our policies. But Senator, if I could take it a bit broader.
Yeah.
It's not just about Taiwan either. It's also the other more than 15 countries that we're working with in the Indo-Pacific that are like-minded, have the same values, and have the same interest. And so bolstering their defenses and ensuring they are seeing the same pernicious behavior that we have seen on behalf of the Chinese is critical. Because they'd rather be looking at 15 nations aligned or 20 nations aligned than just one or two.
Sure, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And as you may or may not know, I've introduced a bill called the Armed Taiwan Act, which would create the Taiwan Security Assistance Initiative modeled on the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative that would help accelerate, the idea is help accelerate Taiwan's deployment of critical asymmetrical defenses. I think it's critical we learn the right lessons from what we're seeing in Ukraine. Obviously, deterrence failed in Ukraine. We don't want to see deterrence fail in Taiwan. We just simply can't afford that. And making sure that they are in a position, the Taiwanese are in a position to wage irregular warfare if necessary, and China knows they can do that, I think is critical. General, let me ask you a related question. What role do you see SOCOM playing in helping to deter or, if necessary, defeat a Chinese invasion of Taiwan?
Senator, I describe our role in that as the war around the edges, and being able to hold hard targets at risk to ensure that we provide the National Command Authority those options. And that is set up by conducting reconnaissance and ensuring, as I addressed to other members, building the undersea capabilities that we need today, ensuring that we are postured in places around the globe that can pull that. That's combining elements like cyber, space, and special operations forces together to provide unique capabilities for our nation.
Let me ask you if you've been able to use any resources freed up from our withdrawal from Afghanistan to invest in more capabilities relevant to the Taiwan scenario.
Senator, we have put additional forces into both the Indo-Pacific theater and into the European theater over the last 3 years. I'd say we started the rebalancing of some of the soft requirements based upon the 2018 National Defense Strategy that identified the threats from near-peer competitors.
But I guess my question is, has the withdrawal from Afghanistan, has that freed up resources that you've been able to repurpose to this theater for this pacing scenario?
I can't draw a direct correlation from one to another, but fundamentally, we do not have as many people in Afghanistan, today. We have no people in Afghanistan today.
China views Africa as key to its global ambitions, which is why they built their first overseas military base in Djibouti. And people don't realize that it's not just that military base in Djibouti. That was the first military base, period, in their history. And so they want to build another one in the west coast of Africa. Now, we witnessed this in Djibouti, and the bulk of the U.S. forces in Africa are special operations troops who work with our partners to build capabilities, collect intelligence, and push back on China, Russia, and terrorist groups. We should deploy more of these troops to Africa, given the growing threats that we have pointed out several times in Africa. General Clarke, what's your assessment of what the Chinese military seeks to accomplish in Africa, and what can our special operations forces do to confront these growing threats?
Senator, I've been to Djibouti many times and also see it as a strategic location, not just for Africa, but what it gives for a platform, for us to conduct counterterrorism missions into the Middle East with its proximity to Yemen. And our is a key strategic hub there. The Chinese clearly see the same thing. For U.S. Special Operations Command in support of AFRICOM, there it's to ensure that the violent extremist elements there are disrupted so they cannot cause a threat back to the United States. As far as our ability by being there really allows us to get to see and sense what the Chinese pernicious behavior is inside of Africa, with a great interest specifically in collecting resources and minerals for the future. And by being there, it helps us to highlight those for the partners with whom we work.
It is likely that many of our military installations in the Pacific would be targeted in the event of conflict with China. And it's clear we need a flexible and resilient approach to logistics in the Pacific. In her testimony last week, General Van Overst, commander of U.S. Transcom, highlighted cybersecurity as a chief threat to her mission as it pertains to contested logistics, and highlighted partnerships with Cybercom. In what ways has Cybercom integrated with the Stratcom and Indo-PACOM regarding the vulnerability of our assets spread across the Pacific?
Two ways, Senator. First of all, being able to ensure that the network that U.S. Transportation Command utilizes, along with a series of private sector companies, this is an unclassified network, is resilient and assured in terms of being able to do that. We've had special focus on U.S. Transcom. The second piece is working with U.S. Transcom, U.S. Indo-PACOM, and other combatant commands to ensure that the partnerships that we have built in the Pacific and Europe are foundational to being able to ensure the cybersecurity of these nations as we continue to partner with them.
A few weeks ago, we heard from Stratcom and Spacecom on their readiness posture. Maintaining our nuclear deterrent and preserving our ability to operate in space are fundamental to today's great power competition with Russia and China. I believe that both of these missions are connected to our cyber defensive and offensive capabilities. The cyber, space, and nuclear missions have to be interconnected and cannot operate in vacuum. So given that my question would be, given the Cybercom is operating in a highly complex and ever-evolving environments, how integrated would you say that the efforts are between Stratcom and Spacecom right now?
Totally integrated. And it begins with the assurance of our nuclear command and control and communications capabilities.
Separately.
Is there any lessons learned from how U.S. Special Operations Forces have been able to help Ukraine that we can apply to potentially what's going to happen when China invades Taiwan, or Iran continuing to threaten Israel?
Yes, sir. Number one is it's not just the U.S. And Ukraine. While we're sitting here, we have 16 NATO nations all on their own accord that are currently working with our Special Operations Command Europe, and they are collaborating, they are sharing, and they are sensing what is happening in that environment that would then collectively be able to provide the best support to Ukraine. And I think the same lessons could be applied in other theaters. The second one is, though, getting ahead of it. The more that you can set up for success today, the better off you will be. And having the urgency to see that in advance and not waiting until the end.